The desert sun was merciless, pouring its fire down on the jagged rocks and endless stretches of sand. In the distance, vultures circled slowly, their shadows sweeping across the earth as if marking death's approach. At the edge of a dry canyon, an Apache woman lay broken and bleeding, her once strong legs now gone beneath the knees, shattered in a brutal raid that left her abandoned. Her tribe, believing her useless to the survival of the people, had left her behind to die, a cruel judgment masked as necessity. But even as the pain burned through her body and despair pressed down like the weight of the desert heat, her eyes held defiance, eyes that had seen battles, blood, and fire, yet still refused to dim. She was not merely a woman of her people, she was a warrior who had fought alongside the fiercest braves, earning scars and respect in a world where few thought a woman could stand as an equal in combat. Now, that honor seemed stripped from her, her body broken, her spirit tested in the most merciless way possible. The rattlesnakes hissed in the brush, the wind carried dust across her torn flesh, but she clenched her fists and whispered to the sky in Apache, promising the spirits of her ancestors she would not give in. And then, as if fate had answered, the sound of hooves echoed in the canyon, slow and steady, drawing closer. Out of the shimmering heat rode a lone cowboy, his silhouette carved against the horizon, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the fallen warrior. Where others saw death, he saw life, flickering, fragile, but worth saving. He reined in his horse, dismounted, and stepped carefully toward her. She raised a bloodied knife, refusing to surrender even in her state. The cowboy did not flinch, instead, he knelt, tipped his hat, and in a voice low and steady said, "Ma'am, you ain't dead yet. Not if I got any say in it." Her knife trembled in her hand, though not from fear, her grip was weak, her blood already soaking the earth beneath her. The cowboy, weathered by years of sun and storms, didn't back away, his calm eyes stayed locked on hers, steady as the desert horizon. He saw the fire still alive in her gaze, and he recognized it, the look of someone who refused to surrender even when the world had already declared them finished. Slowly, he extended a water flask, holding it close enough for her to reach but not close enough to seem forceful. "Drink," he said firmly, as though it were not a suggestion but an order. For a moment, the Apache woman hesitated, her pride battling with her thirst, her distrust of this pale stranger warring with the instincts of survival. Finally, her body betrayed her spirit, and with shaking hands she grabbed the flask and drank deeply, the cool liquid burning her throat like salvation. The cowboy watched in silence, nodding once when she handed it back. He glanced at her legs, or rather, the absence of them, and though his face gave nothing away, his heart tightened. "They left you," he muttered, almost to himself, scanning the horizon as though her tribe's ghosts lingered still. She spat in the dust, her jaw clenched, and answered in a voice hoarse but fierce, "They thought I was dead." The cowboy studied her for a moment, then simply said, "Then we'll prove 'em wrong." He slipped his arms beneath her, lifting her as gently as a wounded bird, though her body tensed at the unfamiliar touch. His horse shifted uneasily, but he secured her carefully across the saddle, tying her in with the precision of a man who'd handled both cattle and battlefields. With a final look at the place where she had nearly been left to die, he swung up beside her, took the reins, and muttered, "Hold on, warrior. This ride's gonna hurt, but you're not done yet." And with that, he spurred his horse forward, carrying her away from the grave the desert had tried to claim. The desert stretched endlessly, every grain of sand shimmering beneath the punishing sun as the cowboy's horse carried its burden across the arid wasteland. The Apache warrior woman fought to remain conscious, each jolt of the saddle sending pain tearing through her body like fire. She clenched her jaw so tightly her teeth ached, refusing to let a single sound of weakness escape her lips. Her people had abandoned her because they believed she had no fight left, but she would not prove them right, not in front of this cowboy, not in front of the spirits of her ancestors that surely watched. The cowboy glanced at her occasionally, his weathered face unreadable, though the grip he kept on the reins was firm, steady, as though he were anchoring them both against the merciless landscape. He didn't speak much, not yet, silence was its own kind of medicine in the desert. Still, he kept his senses sharp, scanning the horizon for any movement, raiding parties, wild animals, or worse, the same men who had slaughtered her people and left her broken. At nightfall, when the sky erupted into a tapestry of stars and the desert cooled into shadow, he finally dismounted and pulled her gently from the horse. She winced but didn't cry out, her pride stronger than the agony of her wounds. He built a small fire, its crackling flames painting their faces in amber light, and for the first time since lifting her from death's edge, he truly looked at her. "You're tougher than most men I've known," he said in a low drawl, handing her a strip of dried meat. "Lost both your legs and still glare at me like you're ready to scalp me." She took the food, biting into it with stubborn defiance, her eyes never leaving his. After a long silence, she rasped, "Why save me? White men don't save Apache women." His gaze held hers, steady, unflinching. "Because leaving you there would have made me no better than the ones who tried to kill you. And I ain't the kind of man who rides away from someone still breathing." She studied him, searching for deception, but found only the hardened honesty of a man who had seen too much and carried it with quiet dignity. That night, under the vast desert sky, two strangers, one broken in body, the other scarred in spirit, sat side by side, bound not by trust just yet, but by survival. And though neither said it aloud, something unspoken had already begun to shift, the knowledge that fate had tied their paths together, and neither of them would walk, or ride, alone from this moment forward. Dawn broke with a crimson glow over the desert, the kind of sunrise that seemed to set the horizon on fire, and the Apache woman stirred to the crackling sound of the cowboy stirring embers into new flame. Her body screamed with pain, but her spirit was restless, unwilling to lie in weakness. She propped herself up on her elbows, the weight of her missing legs heavier than any wound she had ever endured. The cowboy noticed, his hat tipped low, and without a word, he brought over a waterskin and held it steady for her. She drank sparingly, as warriors were trained to do, and then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "You think I'll slow you down," she said, her voice rough but laced with defiance. The cowboy didn't answer immediately. Instead, he saddled the horse, packed his gear, and checked his rifle with a calm precision that spoke of long years on the frontier. Only then did he glance her way, his eyes shadowed under the brim. "You won't slow me down," he said finally. "But you'll test me." She almost smirked at that, because it was true. She was not dead weight, she was fire and iron, and anyone who tried to carry her would need the strength of spirit to match. Still, her people had seen only weakness when they left her bleeding in the dust, believing her life as a warrior was over. The memory of their retreat seared her heart, but the cowboy's words lingered like a strange salve against the wound. As he lifted her back onto the horse, she caught sight of distant shapes on the horizon, crows circling, black specks against the burning sky. She knew what that meant. Death ahead, bodies left behind. Her people's trail. Her jaw tightened, and her hand instinctively reached for a weapon that was no longer there. "You want vengeance," the cowboy said, noticing the fire in her eyes. She didn't deny it. "I want my honor," she whispered, each word sharp as flint. He studied her for a long moment before nodding, as though deciding that honor was a cause worth carrying across the desert. And so they rode on, two broken souls chasing something greater than survival. She, her right to exist as a warrior, and he, a redemption only he seemed to understand. The desert stretched before them, endless and merciless, its sands shimmering with heat even in the early morning. Each hoofbeat echoed like a drum in her chest, steady and unrelenting, and though her body ached, her mind sharpened with every mile. She began to tell the cowboy stories in fragments, of the battles she had fought, of the songs sung around the fire, of how her people believed strength was the only measure of worth. Her voice was low, often breaking, but there was steel beneath it. He listened without interrupting, his silence a strange kind of respect, though his eyes sometimes narrowed when her words touched on betrayal. Finally, she asked the question that had been festering in her since the moment he pulled her from death: why? He kept his gaze fixed on the horizon, chewing over the word as though it were more dangerous than any bullet. "Because I've left men behind before," he said quietly. "And it never leaves you." The answer hit her harder than she expected. Shame, regret, loyalty, those were things she thought belonged only to her people, not to this pale-skinned stranger who smelled of gunpowder and whiskey. For a long while, she said nothing, but when the wind carried the faint, acrid scent of smoke, she stiffened. The cowboy smelled it too. He pulled the horse to a halt, eyes scanning the ridges, and then they both saw it, a column of gray rising in the distance, where the land folded into a canyon. Her heart pounded. It could be her tribe, or it could be the enemy that had scattered them. Either way, it was fire, and fire meant life or death. The cowboy adjusted his rifle on his shoulder and glanced at her. "Still want to keep riding?" he asked. Her answer was immediate, fierce. "I'll ride until the fire dies." And with that, they turned toward the smoke, knowing it could lead to salvation, or straight into the jaws of a blood-soaked reckoning. The closer they drew to the smoke, the thicker the air became with the heavy scent of char and ash, clinging to their throats, making it harder to breathe. The cowboy slowed the horse, his posture tense, his hand never straying far from the butt of his revolver. For the Apache warrior woman, the smell struck deeper, pulling at memories of raids, of burning villages, of screams carried on the wind. Her heart surged with both dread and longing, dread that it might be enemies who set the blaze, longing that it might be her people, still alive, still fighting. As they crested a ridge, the sight below froze her blood. A small encampment lay scattered at the base of the canyon, smoldering fires and broken teepees marking the scene of violence. Horses lay dead, arrows scattered like brittle twigs, and no movement stirred except for the smoke twisting up into the sky. She gripped the saddle horn until her knuckles whitened, her breath shallow and jagged. This is my people's fire," she whispered, her voice trembling. The cowboy studied the carnage with narrowed eyes, his jaw tight. "Could be a fight broke out here not long ago," he muttered. "We'll need to check for survivors." He dismounted, rifle ready, then turned to help her down, though her missing legs made the task a painful humiliation. She refused his hand, dragging herself with raw determination across the ground, her palms burning against the sand and stone. Every movement carried defiance. She was no helpless cripple, she was still Apache. She called out in her tongue, her voice sharp and commanding, but only silence answered, broken by the crackle of dying flames. A crow cawed overhead, circling lazily, as though mocking the emptiness. The cowboy crouched beside a toppled tent, then cursed under his breath. "Tracks. A lot of 'em. Whoever did this, they took captives." Her head snapped up, fire in her eyes. "Then they still breathe," she said, her voice raw with hope and rage. The cowboy met her gaze. "And if we ride after them, we'll be riding straight into hell." She bared her teeth in something between a smile and a snarl. "Then hell will know my name." The trail of the captors wound northward, stamped deep into the soft earth by many boots and dragging hooves, and the cowboy read it like a book written in dust. He noted the width of the wagon wheels, the broken branch where a prisoner may have stumbled, the faint smear of blood upon a stone. Each mark spoke of brutality, of a forced march against weary souls. The Apache woman's eyes burned as she watched him track, her warrior instinct surging even as her body betrayed her with its weakness. She demanded he lift her onto the horse again, though every jolt against the saddle brought lightning pain where her legs once had been. She clenched her jaw, refusing to let him see her grimace. They moved in silence for hours, the sun climbing higher, baking the land in a merciless glow. At last, the cowboy raised his hand, signaling her to stillness. He crouched low, his hat shadowing his eyes, and pointed ahead. Through the heat shimmer rose faint shapes, figures moving, slow and burdened, their outlines flickering like ghosts. Prisoners. Her breath caught, her heart hammering. She knew those silhouettes, the proud gait of an elder who should not be walking so broken, the small frame of a child dragged by a rough hand. Her people, but along with them strode armed riders, their rifles gleaming in the sun, men whose laughter carried cruelly on the wind. Rage boiled inside her, but the cowboy's grip on her arm was steady, grounding. "Rush in now, and you'll die," he warned in a low growl. "And so will they." She turned her face toward him, eyes sharp as obsidian. "Better to die fighting than to live crawling." His gaze lingered on her, seeing the unbroken flame behind her scars. Slowly, he nodded. "Then we don't rush, we stalk, like wolves." They melted into the scrub and stone, following the captors at a distance, two unlikely shadows bound by vengeance, by survival, and by a fire neither pain nor fear could extinguish. As dusk bled across the sky and the captors made camp by a dry riverbed, the time for patience ended. The cowboy and the warrior woman crept through the mesquite brush, their movements quiet as serpents in the grass. The men lounged around a crackling fire, laughing, tossing bones from half-cooked meat, oblivious to the shadows closing in. The prisoners lay bound nearby, too exhausted to resist, their eyes dulled but still alive with faint hope. The woman's blood pounded in her ears, every instinct screamed to charge, to rip into them like the jaguar of her ancestors. But she forced stillness into her body, her hand tightening on the knife the cowboy had pressed into her palm. It was not the steel of her people, but it would taste the same of blood. The cowboy eased his rifle into position, every muscle coiled, waiting for her nod. She gave it, slow and deliberate. The silence shattered with a gunshot, sharp as thunder, dropping the first guard before his drunken laugh could fade. Chaos erupted, men scrambling, curses flying, the crackle of flames kicking sparks into the night. The warrior woman surged forward on her arms, dragging herself across the dirt with a predator's fury, slashing at a captor's leg until he howled and fell. She crawled through blood and dust, her knife flashing again and again, her scream both pain and triumph. The cowboy's rifle barked steadily, every shot measured, cutting down men before they could raise their weapons. Prisoners began to stir, hope surging through them like lightning. One elder broke free, snatching up a fallen club. A boy seized a rock, striking at the ropes of another. The captors, arrogance crumbled into terror as they realized the prey they had mocked was rising against them. Amid the chaos, the warrior woman raised her face toward the firelight, her eyes wild and shining. For the first time since her tribe had left her for dead, she felt alive again, not broken, not discarded, but reborn in battle. The rebellion came like a storm breaking its dam. The prisoners, once slumped in despair, now surged with a ferocity born of desperation and vengeance. Their voices rose in cries that split the desert air, a chorus of rage and freedom. The cowboy reloaded with quick, steady hands, his eyes blazing with focus, while the warrior woman clawed her way toward the heart of the fight. Every thrust of her knife was guided by years of humiliation she refused to carry anymore. A young girl, no more than 14, who had been dragged as chattel, snatched a spear from a fallen captor and drove it into his chest with trembling but resolute hands. The elder, chanting in the old tongue, swung his club with a rhythm like a heartbeat, each strike a reminder that even the broken can rise. Flames from the fire caught on a blanket, spreading to the captors, supplies, throwing wild shadows that turned the battlefield into a hellscape. The smell of blood, smoke, and sweat mingled thick in the air. Still, the captors fought viciously, their shouts echoing off the canyon walls as they tried to crush the uprising. One rushed the cowboy with a hatchet, but the warrior woman hurled herself forward, dragging her body like a serpent, slashing across his ankle and sending him sprawling into the dust where the cowboy's boot pinned him before the rifle spoke. She met the cowboy's eyes for a split second, hers alight with fire, his with grim respect, and without words they knew, they were no longer savior and saved, but equals in the forge of battle. Around them, the prisoners pushed harder, their chains snapping under the force of rebellion, their fear burning into fury. What began as a desperate escape was turning into an all-out war, and with every fallen enemy, the warrior woman felt her spirit rising, higher than the stars above the desert night. The tide of battle shifted so suddenly it was as if the desert itself had chosen sides. The captors, once drunk on power and cruelty, now staggered under the onslaught of those they had enslaved. Fear crept into their eyes, a fear they had never imagined feeling from those they considered broken. The warrior woman, bloodied but unbowed, dragged herself up a boulder to gain height, her blade glinting in the firelight. She bellowed words in her native tongue, ancient cries of war that echoed across the canyon walls. Her voice, hoarse but commanding, cut through the chaos like a whip, ordering, rallying, demanding. The prisoners, hearing their ancestral language reborn in fury, surged with renewed strength. They no longer fought as scattered victims but as a tribe reborn under their forsaken warrior. The cowboy, reloading and firing with deadly precision, realized he wasn't just witnessing survival, he was witnessing leadership reawaken. Even without her legs, she carried the authority of a chieftain, her presence commanding warriors who moments earlier had thought themselves nothing but cattle to be slaughtered. Captors turned to run, but every path was blocked by fire, knives, and the sheer will of those they had once dominated. One of the raiders tried to rally his men, shouting threats, but the warrior woman hurled her knife with such force it buried into his throat, silencing him mid-word. A hush fell for a heartbeat, then the prisoners roared with triumph, surging forward like a river breaking free. The captors, formation shattered. What had begun as a revolt was now a rout. The woman, her body battered and raw, raised her arms to the sky and screamed, not in pain this time, but in victory, in defiance, in rebirth. And in that moment, both the cowboy and the freed prisoners understood. She was no longer just the abandoned, legless warrior crawling in the dust, she was once more the spirit of her people, leading them into destiny. When the dust of battle finally settled and the echoes of steel and gunfire faded into the canyon night, a strange silence fell upon the survivors. They stood around the dying fires, their chests heaving, their eyes wide with the disbelief of what they had just accomplished. The bodies of their captors lay strewn across the sand, weapons abandoned beside lifeless hands. Some of the freed men and women fell to their knees, tears streaming as they clutched one another, astonished that they were still breathing, astonished that hope had not only returned but had been reborn in fire and blood. At the center of it all was the warrior woman. She sat upon a rock, her body trembling from exhaustion and wounds, yet her eyes burned with the fierce light of command. The cowboy approached her slowly, his hat in hand, knowing he was in the presence of something rare, something sacred. He knelt beside her, offering water from his canteen, but more than that, offering respect. The survivors began to gather around her, as though instinctively recognizing a leader. For years, they had been broken apart, enslaved, and silenced, but now their voices returned. Some spoke her name in reverence, while others whispered words of allegiance. The woman, still breathing heavily, looked over them, not as a victim, not as one left behind by her tribe, but as a warrior who had risen from the ashes of betrayal. She raised her hand, bloody and trembling, and declared that they were no longer prisoners, no longer cattle to be herded or bones to be broken. They were free people once more, and their strength had returned with blood spilled on the desert floor. The cowboy saw the awe in their eyes, and in that moment, he knew, this legless warrior woman was no longer defined by what she had lost. She was becoming something greater, an emblem of survival, a chieftain forged in agony, a leader who had proven that even the broken can stand taller than any who walk unscarred.